Before we started recording, I reread Ursula Le Guin's fantastic speech that she gave when she won the National Book Award in 2014, I think. She says, "I think hard times are coming," this is 2014, "when we will be wanting the voices of writers who can see alternatives to how we live now and see through our fear-stricken society and its obsessive technologies to other ways of being, and even imagine some real grounds for hope. We will need writers who can remember freedom, poets, visionaries, the realists of a larger reality. Right now, I think we need writers who know the difference between the production of a market commodity and the practice of an art. Developing written material to suit sales strategies in order to maximize corporate profit and advertising revenue is not quite the same thing as responsible book publishing and authorship. Blah, 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 blah. Poets, visionaries, the realists of a larger reality." I love that phrase, the realists of a larger reality. What she's saying is that what is normally understood to be realist fiction is actually not realist at all. That the fiction or the art of a poet or a visionary is always faithful to a realism that exceeds the limits of what mainstream non-fantastical fiction constitutes. So you were saying earlier that you were talking about this ghettoization.
Yeah.
And this ghettoization doesn't just harm fantasy. It also harms realistic fiction.
Yeah.
Because it prevents us from seeing the fantasy in realist fiction. It prevents us from seeing that, in a way, all fiction comes up from that dark power outside the sunlit world. It comes from a place before reason, before the clear classification of the real into these neat categories. And so the imagination doesn't have the laws that we observe, governing the world outside of us. I'm writing about this right now, and I was imagining, okay, I'll just throw it at you. Imagine that on 3 separate nights, you have a very similar dream. And each of these dreams starts the same way. You're sitting under an apple tree and an apple falls on your head. And as dreams are wont to do, this fills you with dread. You need to know why this happened to you. Like, oh my God, the apple fell on my head. Why did, So you go and seek out.
I had the apple dream again.
Yeah, exactly. So you go out and seek out an answer.
Wake up in a cold sweat, screaming.
You go and look for answers. In the first dream, the first time you have this dream, you find a witch. And she tells you that the tree threw the apple at you because it's an old grumpy tree, doesn't like people sitting under it. And you're like, oh, okay, that's why it happened. In the second dream, you find a monk who tells you that the apple is primarily composed of the element of earth. And so when the apple detaches from the tree, it seeks rest. And so it falls towards the earth where it can be at rest, which would be the Aristotelian explanation for gravity.
Right.
And in the third dream, you find a guy in a wig who tells you that the apple hit your head because you just happened to be there. There's no reason for it. It's just that the apple is small and the earth is big, and little things like to stick to big things. And you're like, well, why? And he goes, well, it's just the law of the universe. And then you wake up from the third dream. Now the question is, in the dream world, is any one of these 3 answers the correct one? Right? Like you can imagine a dream in which you discover gravity, but that doesn't make gravity real in the dream.
That's interesting.
And if you write a book set in a world with gravity, and the gravity exists as Newton described it, you're just picking that law. It doesn't actually exist in the fictional world. Mm-hmm. Like in a way, even a contemporary realist romantic novel about people falling in love in Paris is a fantasy to the extent that it just arbitrarily assumes, for imaginative purposes, certain laws that obtain in our world. Like, okay, think about a movie like Casablanca, right? Play it again, Sam. So the piano player is sitting there. Is he being held to the bench by gravity? No. The actor was sitting on the bench thanks to gravity when they filmed it, but in the world, the gravity doesn't exist until it matters in the aesthetic world. And what I'm saying is that the laws of imagination aren't limited to the laws of physics. So that the laws of physics, however, are a construct of our imagination. As Hume showed, we can't see them. So in a sense, the larger realism, the larger reality that Ursula Le Guin is talking about is a reality that goes beyond what we perceive to be reality, which is actually just a model that we invent. In fact, we don't really know why gravity exists or whether it'll exist tomorrow. The imagination is precisely the moment where we free ourselves from these habits that Hume said we just accumulate in order to explain the world to ourselves. I don't know. It's just
I just for fun, I'm going to pretend to be a realist of a certain kind and say, I don't find your argument persuasive because you're talking about how explanations are no more or less relevant in a dream. I mean, it could befall you that you dream a dream that involves gravity, where Isaac Newton shows up and explains to you that the reason the apple hit your head is because small things are drawn to large things. But that there's no necessity for that a fictional world could as easily, apples could fall on heads because the tree's grumpy. And in fiction, there's no a priori reason to privilege the scientific explanation over the magical explanation. Mm-hmm. Am I getting you right?
Yes.
Well, somebody could say yes, but why should dreams be the measure of fiction? Dreams, as we know, because science tells us this, are but the kind of rubbish removal system of the mind. You encounter various things during the day. For example, a bird shits on you. Actually, this happened to my daughter yesterday. She bought a new book and she was reading it and she's really into it. And then a bird shit on it. And she was so pissed off, she sent me a stream of outraged texts about it. I told her that this was very good luck. And she remains unconvinced, I believe, about that. But anyway, so with dreams, a bird shits on you. And then you have a dream about, a toilet backing up. And why did you have that dream? Well, somebody who is interested in psychological symbolism might be, the toilet and the sludge that comes out of it symbolizes the repressed unconscious mind, all the dark places in ourselves, the shadow. But a rationalist, somebody who is a kind of a scientific realist, would say, oh no, the dreams are simply the rehearsal of fragments of things that happen to you. And then in your sleep, the dream has a function to work through the events of the day and kind of bundle them up with the trash and set them outside by the curb for pickup. It's a way of working through the events of the day so that we can move on afresh every morning that we wake up. And then from that point of view, the dream of the overflowing toilet isn't about you encountering repressed dark parts of yourselves. It's just that a bird shat on you the earlier day. That's it. So why should we take dreams, which have this rather unimpressive hygienic function, why should that be the measure of fiction? On the contrary, if I were a Marxist, I might say that fiction exists to show us things about social reality. The purpose of fiction is not merely to represent things, but to enact changes in us that we become more conscious of systems of oppression and therefore are more apt to do something about them. That is what fiction is for. You being some kind of Vanier hippie have simply decided that dreams are where it's at. I say that it's social reality that's where it's at.
Right. Well, I think that just to go back a step, the condition under which our thought labors in dreams is precisely the same condition under which we labor in reality. That was Hume's argument, and it's not an argument that's easily refuted. What Hume was arguing, and I'll just summarize it very, very quickly. Hume was basically looking at, what's called the problem of induction. And he's saying that we observe these regularities in the world, and we form from these regularities the idea of laws that govern these regularities. So for instance, the sun comes up every day, or when you hit a billiard ball at a particular angle, the billiard ball you hit will go at that particular angle. I guess the laws of motion or something govern these interactions. And of course, it's the cosmological, system that tells us that the sun must rise tomorrow if it rose today. But all Hume was saying was that these laws, these physical laws, causality itself cannot be deduced a priori. There is no logical reason why effect B must follow cause A. There is no logical reason. It's just we observe it and we derive from this habit of observing laws. And those laws may be real laws. He's not saying that those laws don't exist. He's just saying that they have no rational basis. We have no reason to believe that the laws exist. We have
an empirical reason, but that's not the same thing.
It's not the same thing. That's the point, though. You can derive all kinds of logical laws a priori. The law of the excluded middle, the law of the non-contradiction, in the sense that if you want to argue against it, you presuppose it. It's what Aristotle called apodictic. It's like you can't argue against it without affirming it. Okay. But causality is not that. So the moment you realize this, you've realized that, oh, you're under the conditions of a dreaming self right now. It's just the regularities are happening, but your judgments about those regularities are on a par with any of the three explanations in those three dreams. They're just different ways of explaining the regularities. So if anything, you could say that even though we need to embrace something like gravity to explain the world that we live in, that world is already a priori in a dream. It's already dreamlike because we don't have the means of extracting from this world a priori causal laws. Those things come a posteriori from the dreaming itself. So it's like you're using dream stuff to explain how the dream functions, but the dream stuff is made of dream stuff. There's just no way out of the dreaminess of it all. And so I'm not trying to say that's to prove that gravity doesn't exist. What I'm saying is that the other two explanations could also coexist with that one. It could also be the case that, and that's obvious when you think about it, that an old grumpy conscious tree would drop an apple on your head in order to get you to go away. That explanation and Newton's explanation are just two ways of seeing something that's already a priori dreamlike. And which is why a culture can flourish for literally millennia thinking on those terms. Like we don't realize how long we were animists and how many cultures remain animist and function. They work. Those are not suicidal civilizations. Somehow these civilizations function. You don't keep using a tool that doesn't work. I guess what I see in Hume is an opportunity to expand the range of what we call rational. Because since causality in itself is an irrational belief, and not in a judgmental way, it's irrational in the sense that it's not grounded in reason. Since that's the case, and yet it is a perfectly sensible belief, then we might be able to see the sensibility in other ways of understanding reality that find their place in fantastic literature. Maybe these things aren't as opposed as we think they are. They all kind of come from a place of fabulation. They all come from a place of using dream just to produce more dream. It's like we're never popping out of the dream. We're never in the disenchanted place that we've assumed we were in.